Welcome in, everybody, to the first ever episode of the Free Play Podcast. I am your host, Eli Scales, and I am very excited to start off the beginning of this project with you all today. First off, I'm recording this podcast at the Andover Caps building as part of my passion project for our business class here. This podcast started off as an idea I had, and I'm beyond excited to put it into motion here and bring some sports coverage and commentary to you all. The first ever topic we'll be discussing is the most recent ALDS and NLDS games of the MLB playoffs that saw the Mariners win a 15-inning thriller against the Detroit Tigers. This game was absolutely insane. It had the makings of an instant playoff classic here. Just looking at some of the notes that I had written down here, we had Tarik Skubal, the ace of the Detroit Tigers, pitching for them. And on the Mariners side of the ball, we had George Kirby, another stellar starting pitcher that had been nails all season for them. And both of them delivered into making this one a game that neither fan base or MLB fans in general will never forget. Going into the game, Kerry Carpenter had massive struggles in the playoffs. He was hitting atrociously for the Tigers, but they took a chance based off his numbers he had against Kirby, and they put him at the top of the order hitting leadoff, and it paid off in the first inning. He instantly comes through with a single, massive hit for them, and then he continued it all throughout the night. He went 4 for 5 with a run, scored 2 walks, 2 RBI, and a home run that was a big part in the Tigers' 2 runs. Looking down the rest of their lineup, however, there was not really any much help that anyone in the lineup provided. Torres 0 for 6, Riley Green 0 for 6, Spencer Torkelson 0 for 6, Colt Keith 0 for 5, Zach McKinstry 1 for 6, Dingler 2 for 6, Meadows 0 for 5, Javier Baez 1 for 6. And they gave Tarik Skubal absolutely zero help. He pitched 6 phenomenal innings with 2 hits, 1 earned run, 13 punch-outs. Insane for Tarik Skubal, and this is not new for him. He's faced this situation with the Tigers before in the playoffs, and he's come up every single time. First, the game against the Guardians, where he absolutely dismantled their lineup and won them game 1. And then earlier in the series, too, where he had hit some trouble later in the game facing Jorge Polanco of the Mariners. But Tarik Skubal has once again took the ball for the Tigers, and he just dominated through and through with the Seattle lineup. On the Mariners side of the lineup, Randy Arozarena 0 for 5, Cal Raleigh 1 of 5, Julio Rodriguez 0 for 5 but with 2 walks, Jorge Polanco, the star of the game for the Mariners, 1 for 6 but did have the game-winning RBI in the 15th inning, which we'll get to later. Eugenio Suarez 0 for 6, Josh Naylor 3 for 6 coming off the paternity list. He did not travel to Detroit with the team, ends up back with the Mariners for this game, comes up big for them. Mitch Garver 0 for 1 as a pinch hitter. Dominic Canzone came in late in the game. And then the story of Leo Rivas. This is a guy who had been toiling in the minor league for years, and he comes up with the Mariners late in this season, and he just absolutely comes in clutch for them with a big hit here as a pinch hitter. He ends the game 1 for 3, but it was a massive RBI that helped them tie things back up late in the game. And then after that, it goes into extras. Victor Robles 1 for 4, J.P. Crawford hitting 9th, 1 for 6. On the pitching side, George Kirby threw 5 innings with 3 hits, 1 earned run, 6 punch-outs. He was stellar. He got taken out at around 60 pitches as they didn't want him to face Carpenter for a 3rd time, which ended up being the demise of their lineup, of their decision, because Carpenter immediately hits a 2-run homer, which was in the top of the 6th inning, the only runs of the game that the Tigers scored, which is obviously frustrating for a team that had the strength of their team the entire season as their offense. Really no action from the top of the 10th to the top of the 15th for either side, just missed opportunities on both sides, especially by the Tigers. But in the bottom of the 15th, Tommy Canley comes in for Detroit, and immediately we have a J.P. Crawford single, his only hit of the game. Arozarena hit by pitch. Rowley lined out to center, but that did advance runners, as there even was a throwing error by the center fielder Meadows. And then Julio Rodriguez intentionally walked And that really set up a situation here for Jorge Polanco that with the bases loaded, he's got the opportunity to walk off the Detroit Tigers at the Mariners' home stadium, and he delivers once again for the Mariners, sending them to their first ever ALCS in franchise history, which is an absurd thing to say because this is a Mariners franchise that has had storied players like Randy Johnson, Ken Griffey, Ichiro Suzuki, and without time and time again, they have continuously failed to reach this area of the playoffs, but led by Cal Raleigh, his historic season, Julio Rodriguez bringing new passion and energy to this Mariners fan base, 90-72 on the regular season, and they have carried this season into the ALCS, where they are currently facing the Toronto Blue Jays, which we will get to later. Then if that game was not enough, the next day, the Brewers provided another great game playing against the Chicago Cubs at American Family Field. The Brewers ended up taking this one at a score of 3-1. This was a bit of an unpredictable game. These are two teams, both in the NL Central divisional game. Both opponents know each other very well. Craig Counsell, the former manager of the Milwaukee Brewers, lots of bad blood between the two franchises was how that saga ended in Milwaukee. And really, this game was controlled from start to finish by the Milwaukee Brewers. We have Michael Busch, 1 for 3, Nico Horner, 1 for 3, Kyle Tucker, 0 for 4, Seiya Suzuki, 1 for 4, with the lone run for the Chicago Cubs in this one. Ian Happ, 0 for 4, Carson Kelly, 1 for 4, Pete Crow Armstrong, 0 for 3, Dansby Swanson, 0 for 3, Matt Shaw, 0 for 2, and 2 pinch hitters that did come in. But really, this one was controlled by the Brewers. A run scored in the bottom of the first. William Contreras, homer. Then you do get the answer back by Seiya Suzuki there in the top of the second with a solo home run, which would end up being the Cubs' lone run of the game. Great job by the Milwaukee bullpen. This was not a game that was started by anybody. Trevor McGill, the Brewers' closer, is the one that starts this one. He goes an inning, 1 strikeout, but then comes in the rookie flame-throwing sensation Jacob Mizorowski. He holds the Cubs lineup at bay for 4 rock-solid innings. 4 innings, 3 hits, 1 earned run, 3 punch-outs on 54 pitches, 37 strikes, which is a good number for Mizorowski. This is a guy that has struggled a little bit finding his command as he's coming up in the major leagues, but the Brewers here have the faith in him out of the bullpen to come in and give them 4 innings and a winner-go-home game. And ever after Mizorowski came in, it was a 3rd inning by Ashby and an inning and 2/3 by another rookie, Chad Patrick, and then the 2-inning save by Abner Uribe. And this was a solid performance here by the Brewers offense. It was a little sluggish, but a bullpen game by both sides. That's to be expected a little bit. Runs don't come easy in the playoffs, but the Brewers did have some good situational hitting here. Jackson Chourio was 0 for 3, but you look down the lineup, there's not many guys with an O next to their name. Bryce Turang, 1 for 4 with a homer. William Contreras, 1 for 4 with a homer. Christian Yelich, 0 for 4. His playoff struggles continue. Andrew Vaughn, what a midseason pickup by the Brewers in exchange for Aaron Savali, a player who didn't even want to be in Milwaukee anymore, requested a trade. They get a player who was the worst qualified player in the MLB. They pick him up, spends some time in their minor league system, comes up, and he absolutely mashes for them and helps them significantly in aiding their first base spot on the roster. Sal Frelick, 1 for 3. Durbin, 2 for 2. Blake Perkins and Ortiz both 0 for on the game. But this is a Milwaukee Brewers team that has played well all season. We know the storyline, playing for Bob Uecker, and this narrative keeps seeming to will them through in the playoffs. And it's a fun story. We'll see how far they can end up making it. Obviously, they are the number 1 seed in the NL side of things, but they have run into a juggernaut in the Los Angeles Dodgers. And so far, not getting too far ahead of myself, it's proved that it has been a little bit of a struggle for them. Next, transitioning into a recap of the college football Week 7 slate. First off, I want to talk about the Kansas State Wildcats getting a big home win over TCU. K-State fans, myself included, did not think would be possible for the Cats to squeeze out because of how good the TCU offense had been up to that point in the season and how seemingly non-existent the Kansas State defense was at times. There's times where they seem like they have it put together, and then other times like we saw at Baylor where it's easy drives down the field with minimal time left on the clock to get a crucial score that ends up being the difference in the game. In this one, TCU came in 4-1. The Cats were scraping to try to get out a win here. They needed this one badly. They come into the game at 2-4, and the game ends up with a closer score than what actually was the result and how the game seemed. Josh Hoover down for much of the game, throws for 376 yards. However, this was not a good performance by him. 26 of 47, 3 touchdowns and 2 interceptions, both coming from the Topeka, Kansas product, Desmond Purnell, which we'll get to one of those interceptions later. Avery Johnson, 16 for 26, 189 passing yards, 3 touchdowns. Nice game there for Avery Johnson. He needed that one. Rushing game, Joe Jackson from Kansas State outgains the TCU running back Barnes, 110-81. This was a game where we didn't know what the production on the Kansas State rushing attack would be with the reluctancy of the coaching staff to use Avery Johnson's legs and no Dylan Edwards once again for the Cats. But Joe Jackson with 27 carries put the team on his back. Great performance by him. And this was one that they desperately needed out of Joe Jackson here. Averaging over 4 yards per carry with a long of 21, his career high. On the receiving side of things, we have Eric McAllister from TCU with a massive touchdown catch that was kind of almost a gut punch to the Wildcats, that you seem like you finally have it together, and then all of a sudden out of nowhere, here's Eric McAllister with a massive touchdown. It was 85 yards to essentially bring the game within striking distance for TCU. But then Kansas State goes down, responds again. Garrett Oakley with a big game, becoming the all-time touchdown leader at K-State for tight ends, passing Ben Sinnott, among others. 4 for 71 for Oakley, 2 touchdowns with a long of 32 in the air. Jerron Tibbs, again, consistency out of him. 3 for 51 with a long of 31. Jace Brown only with 3 catches, which is something we have not seen a lot here for the Wildcats. This is a guy Avery Johnson loves to target, but they just didn't get him involved in this one. But Jaron Bradley in there with a touchdown catch for the Cats. Nice to get him back from injury for sure. On the defensive side of things, this was one that Kansas State loved. Joe Klanderman will have to be happy about this one. Wesley Fair with the scoop and score off the lateral pass, which was a great play for him. You love to see that out of him. He's had a bit of a rough year so far, but that's one that hopefully can give him some confidence in his ability and will help him to play better throughout the rest of the season. And talking about Desmond Purnell, 5 total tackles, 1 sack, 2 TFLs, 2 pass deflections, and a touchdown, 2 interceptions in there. The pick 6, massive play by Desmond Purnell, that flipped the switch of the game, it felt like, and really put the spirits down of the TCU offense. Despite scoring 28 points in the game, it was no match for the Kansas State offense, putting up 41 and just blitzing them. This game started off slow. 0 points throughout the first quarter, and then TCU goes down and scores a touchdown, but then Kansas State responds the rest of the game. 14 in the second quarter, 14 in the third quarter, 13 in the fourth quarter, end up with 41 points, and the Cats have their 3rd victory of the season. The next game you have on the slate that we'll talk about was a great game between the number 7 ranked Indiana Hoosiers coming into the game undefeated, and the Oregon Ducks, number 3 Oregon Ducks, who came into the game also undefeated. And they picked up their first loss of the season at home to an Indiana team that is sneaky talented. Fernando Mendoza, 20 of 31, touchdown and interception, 215 yards, but he outplayed Dante Moore. These are 2 guys that were both in the mix for the Heisman, which we'll get to later. Dante Moore, 186 passing yards, 21 of 34, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. Not so good of a game for Dante Moore, but I'm sure he'll bounce back. But this was a game that was just pretty much dominated by Indiana. 326 to 267 of yards of total offense. They won the turnover battle. picked up 9 more first downs, had less penalty yardage than Oregon, were more better percentage on. They converted on third down at a higher percentage than Oregon, and they never really got themselves into a position where they had fourth downs, only having 1 fourth down while Oregon had 4. The time of possession also favored the Hoosiers in this one, 33-26. So this is a signature win for Curt Cignetti, and this is a thing that we have not been able to easily say about the Indiana Hoosiers so far in his 2-year tenure at Indiana. They haven't had many signature wins. You go and you get blown out last year in the college football playoff, which was not a good look, especially for the reputation that Indiana was trying to build. But this year, they are a force to be reckoned with. They reloaded from last year, and they have been even better than what they were last year. This team is a team that could make a strong push for the national championship. They are highly ranked right now. They are unbeaten, and nothing has really seemed to faze them this season. They play through the toughest of atmospheres, as we can see, by going into Oregon and knocking off a Ducks team that is very talented and very well coached by Dan Lanning. These are 2 guys who came from the Nick Saban tree at Alabama, and we can especially see it in Curt Cignetti, who I believe is a top 5 coach in college football. He has that dog in him, as they say. Curt Cignetti backs down from nobody. He walks into the fire at Autzen Stadium, and he just dismantles the Oregon Ducks. A powerful offense from them, only puts up 20 points. Great game by the Hoosier defense. The next game on the schedule was Oklahoma and Texas. Red River rivalry game, and this one was dominantly controlled by Texas. John Mateer, 20 of 38, no touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Arch Manning, 21 for 27, 166 yards, and a touchdown, no interceptions. And this one was controlled start to finish by Texas. OU only had the lead once, and that was in the first quarter. And after that, it was controlled by Texas throughout the rest of the way. This was a great performance by Arch Manning. This is the best we've seen of Arch Manning and against any real competition. He's had good games before, but this was really the first one against a team that is nationally respected, that we've been able to really take something away from. And we showed the promise and the potential that was given to him as a recruit. Texas won the rivalry game consecutively this year for the first time since 2008-2009, taking this game back-to-back years away from the Sooners, which is a good start for Sark & Co., trying to build on this and reestablish dominance of the rivalry after it kind of slipped away from them in the 2010s with that big run of QBs coming out of OU with Lincoln Riley. And it seems like now they're starting to get a foothold back on the rivalry game, which is one of the biggest in all of college football. John Mateer absolutely dismantled his Heisman stock for the season. 3 interceptions to no touchdowns. Playing through a bit of a hand injury that he'd coming back from, he did not necessarily look 100%, but that's the risk you play playing a QB that is injured. So not a great game at all by John Mateer, which will probably end up costing him a shot at a spot in New York for the Heisman ceremony. Lastly, the biggest headline of the week was Penn State. James Franklin is out as the head coach at Penn State after numerous years, lots of wins, and lots of top 25 AP poll finishes, but they have moved on from him after 3 consecutive losses. But this brings up the question, did they move on from Franklin too early? They were 1 game away from the national championship last year after beating Boise and suffering just a 3-point loss to Notre Dame, the team that eventually lost in the national championship to Ohio State. But to be fired 6 games later seems like a bit of an overreaction by Penn State. Just 3 weeks ago, Penn State was number 2 in the poll, leading Oregon in overtime. College Game Day featuring them. Now James Franklin is gone, and there is no coach at Penn State. So this brings up the question where they go from here. Well, you have to take big swings. This includes coaches like Marcus Freeman and coaches like even someone like Matt Rule with ties back to the Penn State program. You have to bring in somebody that has the ability to get marquee wins. This was something that James Franklin struggled with through his entirety. It's always the knock on him. He can't get any big wins. No big wins. You look at his record against top 25 teams, and it is abysmal. He has an under 500 record against top 25 teams, which is unacceptable for a coach at a powerhouse like Penn State. While they were consistently a high floor team, the top end results were never there for Penn State under James Franklin, which is, I believe, why he got fired. My belief is that James Franklin was fired a little too early. We're seeing the $49 million buyout numbers, and to me, for a coach that has been as good as James Franklin, you don't fire him just off of bad results in the last 3 games. You have to let him get the rest of the season. Even though Drew Aller was injured, you still have to let Franklin play out the rest of the season, and then you can make your decision. And even then, it might have still been a little too early. But it seems like there was probably some boosters and people involved at Penn State that were not happy with his results, even after the result last year in the college football playoff, beating Boise State with Ashton Genty, but in just narrowly losing to a very, very talented Notre Dame team. But we'll see where James Franklin goes from here. We'll see where Penn State goes from here. I 100% believe James Franklin will pick up another Power 2, Power 3 coaching job here, and we'll see what he can do with that. I have no doubt in my mind that he'll probably rebuild another team as he did at Vanderbilt, which landed him the opportunity to coach at Penn State. For this next segment, I want to give a shout out to a guy that I have known for a long time, Ben Smith. I know he's listening to this one, and the co-host of the Second Take podcast. I've been on that podcast. This is kind of what inspired me to start my own podcast, and I texted him on Saturday. I said, who's going to win Heisman now? The odds have to be shifted so much at this point. The guys that were the top preseason favorites, such as Jeremiah Smith, have not had the seasons that they were expected to have. Other players like Jeremiah Love have not been up to the standards that they were presumed to have before the season. And we've seen a lot of guys shift in and out of the top here, and especially Dante Moore falling a lot this week, as well as John Mateer. So looking at the odds here, this is off of Fox Sports. The leader in the clubhouse right now is a 2-man tie for first place. Ty Simpson of Alabama and Carson Beck at Miami, both plus 350 here. Alabama and Ty Simpson will play versus Tennessee this week, while Carson Beck at Miami has Louisville this week. So we'll see what both of them can do. I would imagine the plus 350 will not stay where it is, and we will see one person clearly shift to the top. Also noted is Fernando Mendoza, who I mentioned earlier, at plus 550, so just a little bit behind. And Indiana has a very good schedule the rest of the year, and they play Michigan State this week. Opportunity for Fernando Mendoza to boost his stats up a little bit and try to continue this thing rolling here with Indiana and get himself into the Heisman mix here. Going down the board, Jeremiah Smith at plus 1,400, playing Wisconsin, as with Julian Sayin, both on Ohio State, plus 1,500. They are outside shots at this point. Going into the year, Jeremiah Smith was pretty much the odds-on favorite to win the award after his dominant freshman year, but it seems like the quarterback switch from Will Howard to Julian Sayin has really impacted him a little bit, as Sayin is just not as developed as Will Howard was when it came to consistently getting a top-end target the ball, as well as the focus that defenses are putting on Jeremiah Smith. It all kind of started in the Cotton Bowl game against Texas. Texas kind of shut down Jeremiah Smith, and they provided the blueprint to stopping the dynamic freshman at the time. And it seems like a lot of defenses have carried that over into this season, into a sophomore year, and have really shut him down from putting up big numbers. That'll do it for this episode of the Free Play Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me on the first ever episode of this journey. Next week on the schedule, we have some more ALCS and NLCS games for the MLB playoffs. We have another good slate of college football and NFL games. Once again, thank you so much for listening to this, and catch you guys later.